everyone. I'm Eszter Vajda, and welcome to Politics is Sexy. I'm joined by Tom Farmer, formerly with CNN, and Face the Facts USA, Ed Rombach with Reuters, formerly with Reuters, and a currency advisor, and Rich Rubino, a political author and columnist. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Eszter. Happy Christmas.
Happy
Ho,
Christmas.
ho,
ho. All right, so we've got our final screencast of the year, and what a year it has been. So we're going to take a look back at the best and worst political moves, the movers and shakers of 2013, and who to look forward to in 2014. So let's start out with the best political move and the worst political move. Tom Farmer, one of each, and give me about 30 seconds on each and why.
Sure. The best political move of the year by far, I think, was Speaker John Boehner putting the Ryan Murray budget compromise to a vote in the House, knowing that he would lose the rump Tea Party faction and need a certain number of Democrats to pass it. He did so and emerged looking like a statesman for the first time in years and looking like he was overcoming the demons that haunt the party. Worst political move, and I think it's a tie, is between the Tea Party Republicans who ran the country into the ditch in October and forced a government shutdown. For obvious reasons, the party's brand was hurt. The polls showed that the vast majority of the country thought it was a terrible, terrible thing. And Obama telling the American people repeatedly throughout 2013 and earlier that if you like your health plan, you can keep your health plan. Manifestly not the case, as millions are finding out right now, and Obama is paying a serious price for thinking he could get away with that. That, too, taints his brand, perhaps permanently. So there's my best and worst.
Okay, I would say, yeah, I agree with you with John Boehner's move emerged for the very first time in a long time, showing a little bit of compromise. Ed Rombach, best and worst political move of 2013.
Well, in my opinion, the best political move in 2013 was President Obama deciding not to attack Syria. Everything looked to the contrary, right up until the very last minute when the administration stumbled its way into a solution to not having to go to war, which could have escalated. And basically, an attack on Syria would have been a springboard attack on Iran as a proxy kind of conflict. So John Kerry, Secretary Kerry, kind of stumbled into that, solution by having the Syrians disarm their gas weapons. And the Russians aided in that, and so now there are some negotiations along that line. We'll see how it plays out. The worst political move, I agree with Tom, the conservative Tea Party wing of the GOP deciding to shut down the government. They took, it was no strategy, there was no end game for it. And, fortunately, it didn't drag on too long, and it's kind of in the rearview mirror at this point because it got overtaken by Obamacare events.
Okay, Rich Rubino.
I'm trying to be a tad different here. The best political move was a recent one, and it's really a case of strategic brilliance on the part of President Obama. Max Baucus, who's 72 years old, the chairman of the Finance Committee, and a senator from Montana who's retiring at the end of the year, he nominated him to become ambassador to China. And this is a two-for. First of all, at home, that means that Steve Bullock, the governor of Montana, gets to appoint a successor. And that successor is going to be John Walsh, who's the current lieutenant governor of Montana, former adjutant general of National Guard prominence for 30 years in the state. He's now going to be a United States senator running for essentially for Baucus's term in 2014. This gives him some chance to actually show some independence from Barack Obama in a state where Mitt Romney won by 55% of the votes. We can actually display I've been independent here, here, and here as he runs for an election in a tough state in a tough year of 2014. And also, by the way, with Baucus was the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, so that seat now becomes vacant. And Ron Wyden will take that over. He was also next in line on the Energy Committee. So who's going to become the chairman of the Energy National Resources Committee? Mary Landrieu, the senator from Louisiana, another vulnerable Democrat, probably the second most vulnerable Democrat behind Mark Pryor this year. She now is able to She is now able to go home to Louisiana and say, I am the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee and Energy at the Energy and National Resources Committee, a very powerful committee, especially for the state of Louisiana. She can talk about what she's done for drilling. She can talk about how she's been independent of the president. This is really a benefit for her in that she can now say that I am the chairman. I'll either be the chairman or the ranking member of this committee, a very powerful committee. It also means that the energy industry specifically is going to be a very huge benefactor for her, knowing that she's in such a powerful position. So three people benefited here.
Domino effect of
Yes.
one decision. Okay. And the worst political move?
Barbara Buono, the state senator, former Senate Majority Leader. She had a very promising career in New Jersey. She ran for governor, garnered only 39% of the vote in a race which she was really a token. It was really token opposition. The Democratic Party did not really give her any money, not very much funding. There weren't any appearances by Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Al Gore. They basically let her hang out to dry, and Chris Christie won with 61% of the vote in a very Democratic state. The question is, if you can lose by that margin, does she have any future in American politics? And I say she was once a very bright figure. The first female Senate Majority Leader. She's a very bright figure in New Jersey politics. Now the question is kind of, where do I go from here?
Interesting. Okay. Now, before we started this recast, we were talking, and I said to these guys, I hope you do not say that the worst law of 2013 is Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act. And Rich pointed out,
yes,
wait a second, it wasn't passed in 2013. It was, in fact, passed in 2012. It's a moot point. Okay, well then, having said that, let's start with you, Rich. Best law, worst law, either state or federal. And by the way, did you guys hear the president signed the budget deal today? Late today?
Yes, I did.
So
yes,
that's in place now. Rich Rubino, best and worst law, either state or federal.
Well, there's only been 57 laws passed, so and there really haven't been any major ones. So you really have to really dig in the minutia to find one that's positive. But there's actually the Help Our Heroes Fly Act by Tulsi Gabbard, who's a veteran herself, the first Hindu ever elected to the United States Congress as well. This is an interesting side note. But this piece of legislation essentially requires that the airlines make every possible accommodation in terms of giving advanced screening to any disabled veterans or disabled current members of the military. It's kind of hard to be against that. The only other things that they've really passed has been naming federal courthouses after people that have died. So I think that was probably the most positive one. And
okay,
I think the worst law. What's that?
And the worst law?
Worst law, which didn't pass actually, but it had the support of 26 United States senators, a bipartisan support, was the Stop Iran Nuclear Weapons Act, essentially. The Nuclear Weapons Free Iran Act, which essentially would have increased sanctions on Iran at a time when the rial, the Iranian currency, is already essentially inflated to the extent of 80%. What we're doing here is essentially we're enfeebling the people. We are effectuating enmity amongst the Iranian people toward the United States. Of course, it didn't pass. But as I say, what this is really doing, it's just basically continuing to create a wedge between the Iranian and the American people, which really goes back to 1953 when we essentially dislodged Mohammad Mossadegh, the Shah of Iran. So it's not. This will not help. But thankfully, it didn't pass.
Okay, best and worst law, Ed Rombach.
Best first. Best law, and it hasn't been passed yet, at least not in the full Congress, but Senator Rand Paul introduced the Bipartisan Federal Reserve Transparency Act of 2013, Senate Bill 209, and it currently has 19 bipartisan co-sponsors. It's commonly known as the Audit the Fed bill. And if you recall, his father had introduced basically identical legislation during the 112th Congress, also known as Audit the Fed legislation. That was H.R. 459, and that passed the House with overwhelming bipartisan support, 327 to 98. And Senator Paul's version is basically the same. It's a companion piece. It's being held up by Harry Reid in the Senate. And Senator Paul is promising to try and delay Janet Yellen's appointment to chairman of the Federal Reserve until this law is allowed to come for a vote on the Senate floor. So we'll see how that plays out. That, in my opinion, is the best law because the Federal Reserve definitely needs to be audited. Worst federal law, I wish we could say Obamacare because that really is the best example. But aside from that, I would say the budget deal that the president signed into law today was probably the worst deal for three reasons. One, because they made such a big deal of how this would reduce the deficit. Well, we're talking about $23 billion in deficit reduction, projected at least, forecasted over 10 years. That's $2.3 billion a year. This is nothing. It's not even, that doesn't even merit being a rounding error.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
it's laughable. But the other two reasons why it was an awful bill is because it reduced benefits for veterans from coming home from the war, and it also it eliminated the extended unemployment benefits, federal benefits for the long-term unemployed, of which count number about 1.3 million people. So we're going to see how that reduced aggregate demand, consumer purchasing power plays out in as soon as the year starts.
Okay, Ed, Tom.
All right, guys, I'm going to go to the state level for both best and worst. Actually, worst at the municipal level, but we'll get to that in a second. Best laws, I think, are the growing number of state level liberalization laws around marijuana. We have for decades defended an arbitrary and illogical distinction between alcohol and marijuana. It makes no sense in this country that you can buy a case of scotch and stick it in the trunk of your car, but you can go to jail in some states for buying a gram of dope. I don't like dope culture. I think dope culture is stupid, but the distinction is indefensible. It makes a lot of sense, and most police agencies around the country will agree to loosen this stuff up and let people get on with their lives and do what they want, at least in that sector. The worst law, I think, comes out of New York City. An attempt, a proposed law to ban e-cigarettes, which, in point of fact, help people quit smoking and save a lot of lives. I have a young college friend who says that the number of college kids he knows who have switched to e-cigarettes and gotten off tobacco is significant. It has done them a world of good. The idea that we should be contemplating arbitrary bans on things like this instead of thinking them through is an extension of the kind of nanny state mentality that I'm afraid has infected New York City for some time. When Mayor de Blasio gets in, people seem to think that's going to be a renaissance for old 60s era liberalism, but people also forget how small an enclave New York City really is, and how, in the context of the whole country, how out of step it is with what the broader country is thinking. So, in summary, dope good, e-cigarettes good, can't understand why you'd ban one and not the other.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, I'd love to hear from our audience members of what they think some of those best and worst are. Let's move on now to person to watch. We're going to move on to the new year, and the person to watch in 2014, not only on the federal but also on a local level. Tom Farmer, let's go with you. Who, man or woman, in politics or in the financial field?
Well, I'm going to take you actually into the media world for a moment, because I want to point to 2014 as a year of seminal shakeup in the world of late-night political commentary. You've got John Oliver moving away from The Daily Show and starting his own program on HBO. You've got Jon Stewart apparently considering his options after 15 years in The Daily Show slot and after directing his first feature film. And most interestingly, you have Jay Leno as a free agent after February, leaving The Tonight Show on NBC to Jimmy Fallon and being courted assiduously, apparently, by CNN, my old bosses. Now, if they can attract Jay Leno to CNN, it will change the face of that lineup and change the face of political commentary in this country in a big way. Leno has always gone after political interviews and made news and been fairly effective at it in a way that Jimmy Fallon hasn't and can't. Piers Morgan may find himself on a boat back to the UK. So you're going to see a big shuffle in the political, the sort of elite commentary environment in the next 6 to 12 months. As Oliver settles in at HBO, Stewart maybe gets tired, and Leno looks to examine his next options. It's going to be fascinating to watch.
Tom, why do you think the shakeup would lead to this mix-up? I mean, I know the ratings at CNN haven't been very good or been really bad. MSNBC, same. What do you think led to this?
Well, it led to the sort of series of personnel changes. It just is a bunch of happy coincidences. Leno was given his retirement date for, I guess, the second or third time by NBC in order to keep Jimmy Fallon in-house and guarantee him the Tonight Show in his schedule. Leno's only 65, 66 years old. He's got a lot of running room left in him. Larry King is 80 or so. So he can go on for years. He's just not going to do it at NBC, and I can't believe he's going to be happy just playing Vegas. He wants to have an effect on the culture. He wants to stay in the spotlight, and CNN would be a really interesting place. Now, that would change the CNN brand and make it more entertainment-oriented and possibly put them in the running against Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity, which beat CNN like a Chinese gong 5 nights a week. So we're going to maybe see some competition in that zone for the first time in years. At any rate, they are trying things, and it all affects the political culture and the way Playbook is written on weekday mornings and what people talk about. It's going to be real interesting to watch, especially as Leno has a conservative bent.
Yeah, wow. By the way, you guys know where Jay Leno's from, right?
Massachusetts.
From Massachusetts.
Andover, Massachusetts. His parents lived next door to us for many years. Little known fact. Isn't that funny?
Oh, well, I can tell you another coincidence.
Yeah.
A roommate that I had in college was a good pal of his.
Interesting. Ooh, we may have to try and get to Jay Leno. Ed Rombach, who are you watching? Who should we be watching in 2014?
Okay, the name that keeps on popping up on my radar is the governor of New Mexico, Susana Martinez. And she is being touted as a, blend of, a very pragmatic blend of conservative and moderate politics, obviously a following in the Hispanic community. And I could see any number of Republican, the GOP prospective candidates, from Rand Paul to Ted Cruz to Chris Christie and others, reaching out to her to establish ties and building bridges to her. Because that's the kind of combination of politics that they want to do to broaden the base of the Republican Party as we go into 2014 and then into 2016. Rand Paul, for instance, he recently spoke in Detroit, reaching out to the African-American community. And it would be a natural pick for him to reach out to Susana Martinez. And so I could see that kind of dynamic taking place, and she's really in the catbird seat right now, and that would be a perfect complement or opposition, let's say, to Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Wow, very interesting. Okay, Rich Rubino.
Yeah, she has to get reelected first, but I think that seems to be a foregone conclusion right now. Actually, you believe it or not, the mayor of what's that? The mayor of
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay. The mayor of Saratoga Springs, Utah, is a 38-year-old daughter of Haitian immigrants. Her name is Mia Love, and Jim Matheson, who was actually in the 3rd Congressional District of Utah, probably the only Democrat who could hold this seat. He actually beat her last time by 768 votes in 2012. He's announced that in 2014 he will not be seeking re-election, meaning that essentially this is a seat, by the way, that went for 67% last time for Mitt Romney. It was the fact that Jim Matheson was the son of a former governor and had one of the 2 or 3 most conservative voting records in the Democratic Party that he was even able to survive. So he's seen the handwriting on the wall. He's probably going to run statewide in 2016 for governor or senator. So this leaves Mia Love essentially as I would say essentially as the next congressperson from the 3rd Congressional District of Utah. Now, she's a very interesting, very dynamic speaker. As I say, how many daughters of Haitian immigrants are mayor of Saratoga Springs, Utah? She gave a very dynamic speech in 2012 at the Republican National Convention, and my prediction is that she will be elected in 2014, and in 2016, she will be the keynote speaker, whoever the Republican nominee is. She will be the keynote speaker at the Republican National Convention, and by 2020, she will be talked about as a potential vice presidential running mate or whoever the presidential candidate is. She really is she's a very interesting and very unique unique individual.
Okay. Oh, very interesting. Okay. So We know that this Congress has been the least active. What did you say, Rich? 57 laws passed?
57, and a lot of those were just naming courthouses, which passed unanimously anyway. So you take those away, like the act that I mentioned, the Heroes Act. There are very few that actually had any substance to them.
And this Congress has probably the lowest approval rating in history of Congress. That would be a true fact. So I want to hear from you guys a minute. Let's do 45 seconds each. Whether this 2014 will be a better or worse year, if you can even get any worse than 2013. Let's start with you, Tom Farmer. Better or worse?
Yeah, it's going to be better. It's going to be better because the Wall Street and investors have some certainty about the fiscal road ahead for the first time in a long time. That will lead to more investor confidence, and the markets will continue to go up. Obviously, it doesn't drag everybody along with it, that upturn, but you're going to have some fiscal certitude for the first time in a long time. Plenty of other things still have to be done, of course, and we can get to those down the road here in a moment. But you have all the foundation in place for a good solid growth in GDP. Good solid corporate earnings continue. If you are in equities, I think you'll do well. Maybe not 23% well like you did this year, but you will do well. And you can relax a little bit for the first time in certainly in the Obama administration. So I'm quasi optimistic about the fiscal side of 2014.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, Ed Rombach.
Okay, I was really on the other side of the fence up until recent days, but in the past few days, literally, I've come over to kind of Tom's way of thinking on this. I think 2014 could be a better year for a couple of reasons. Obviously, for the economy is going better than expected. I mean, the third quarter GDP was revised up to 4.1%. This past week, we've had a lot of better than expected economic data. Chicago Purchasing Management Index was better than expected with durable goods. And so, you know, the economy seems to be making some progress, and interest rates are moving higher as a result. Not because so much that the market is pricing in the Fed doing a taper, but they're pricing in recovery and demand for money, which would put upward pressure on interest rates. So that's, I think that confirms it. I'm not entirely convinced, because if the taper goes badly, it could create a relapse for the economy. It could really put the kibosh on this housing recovery that has had its fits and starts. And the other reason why I think 2014 could be a better year is if we continue to make progress in negotiations with Iran, and we don't end up attacking Syria, don't end up getting involved in another large military engagement with like Iran this time.
South Sudan, another involvement.
Well, yeah, South Sudan is a hot spot. You know, we Americans were shot at and fired upon. I think some were wounded trying to get Americans out of that area. And whenever I hear headlines like that, it makes me very nervous. What are we doing in Sudan, of all places? But
okay.
There's lots of risk out there. The world is a risky place.
I'm loving this. We've got two positives. Are you on board with that, Rich Rubino?
I'm actually on the level of status quo. I think that essentially I think that for the most part, first of all, politically, I think it's going to continue to be a stalemate just because it's in the politicians' best interest. In terms of the Republicans, the Tea Party members who are elected in districts, many of them elected in districts that go 60 to 70% for the Republican, they have no incentive to compromise. On the other hand, there are many progressives on the left who have no incentive to compromise either, because they come from districts where the only trepidation they have is for somebody to potentially challenge them in the primary. And as moderates like Jim Matheson continue to retire, there are very few. It's only 14 Blue Dogs left. I think there'll probably be 10 or 11 in the next in the 2015 in the next Congress. I think economically, I do think that that the status quo will continue. The fact that the deficit has gone down, and the fact that Barack Obama is not heralding this every day is kind of I'm kind of I guess bemused by it. I remember Bill Clinton used to always get up there and say, "We've created," no matter how many jobs it was, no matter what the speech was at, somehow he was able to say, "We created 20 million new jobs." mean, he would even say this. I remember in 2000, at the changing of the millennium, he was talking about the great things about the millennium. And one of them was the fact that we created 19 million new jobs at the time. Obama doesn't do that. I mean, how much Obama actually gets credit, how much of that is actually Obama's doing, the deficits is going down. I mean, who knows? But just the fact that presidents tend to boast, he does not tend to necessarily boast about that. But I think economically, it would essentially will be status quo. I think on the foreign scene, you're right, but you're right in terms of the fact that we certainly were able to avoid an entanglement with Syria, but who knows what could potentially come? I mean, who knew in 1965, for example, that the U.S. would have a conflict and end up invading Dominican Republic, or 1983 that we'd invade Grenada? So the answer is who knows, but economically, I would say status quo. Politically, I think there'll be a lot of courthouses named after politicians and judges who died, but I don't think beyond that, I don't think there'll be much substance.
I got to tell you, I'll go with Tom and Ed on this, that it's going to be a better year, not only financially, economically. I think the markets and the job situation is looking better, but I got to tell you that Ryan Murray budget deal really was, I saw a little bit of hope for a little bit more bipartisanship, and it was definitely a good step. So with that, final thoughts from this distinguished panel on 2013 going to 2014 and what you guys are looking for. Rich Rubino, keep it to less than a minute, please. Go ahead.
I'll just reiterate, it was aforementioned. I think this is going to essentially be a status quo year. The fact that we have elections every 2 years essentially means that there's that the first year of a presidency, where it's the first year of the second term, or the first term of the second term, is the one where you're supposed to get things done. In the second term, basically the president goes out and spends most of his time fundraising. In this case, be fundraising, because if he's on the campaign trail in many places, he's actually an electoral incubus to a lot of politicians who's going to be spending a lot of time fundraising. There's going to be a lot of advertisements on the air. It almost makes you wonder if it would be better to go to a system. You know, Jimmy Carter, Mike Mansfield in the past have talked about the idea of what about having the presidency be, for example, 1 6-year term like they do in Mexico. We're essentially in a permanent election cycle. I mean,
we can definitely talk about that. Just one final sentence about 2013.
2013 will be a lot like 2014. It'll be status quo, and there will be a lot of federal courthouses named after famous people, but not much else. And there's going to be election this year too.
Final thoughts on 2013 before we close the door and start a new year.
Well, if you think you've seen the end of Too Big to Fail, well, think again, because there's more Too Big to Fail in the pipeline. If enrollees in the Affordable Care Act continue to be dominated by Medicaid and old and sick people and shunned by the young and healthy, then health care insurers will be paying out far more in health claims than they take in health insurance premiums. And so what happens if this goes gets bad enough for the insurers, it will trigger affordable health care corridor thresholds for the insurers that's embedded in the law, whereby the federal government will bail out the insurers at taxpayers' expense. So that will be one of the next chapters to be written in the year ahead.
Okay. Tom Farmer, final thoughts
on
2013.
It's an old saying in the public relations business that if you don't tell your story, if you don't fill the vacuum, somebody else will tell it for you, and you may not get the narrative you want. Proven over and over in the corporate world, Obama proved it this year in the presidential world. He got kicked down Main Street over and over again on the IRS, on Benghazi, on NSA, on the indecision over Syria, on the Health Care Act disaster, on the government chaos that took over the headlines during the fall. All of this made him look like he's presiding over a presidency which is essentially over already, and obscured the good news that, as Rich said, he could take credit for, but doesn't, because he doesn't write his own narrative. Wall Street up 23% or so. Foreclosures are going down in this country. The unemployment rate is going down in this country. We are putting people back to work. We're starting to get things rolling again. But Obama looks like an absentee president already, and you can sense that not only Republicans, but an increasing number of Democrats wish wish this whole thing were over. He is refusing to write the narrative, and therefore it's being written for him, and he's not the star of the story anymore. 2014 for both parties can't come soon enough. We're going to have a real rockin' midterm election, and as soon as that's over, Obama won't get his calls returned even by Jay Leno, because everyone is focusing on 2016. So the presidency is, in my view, pretty much irrecoverable, regardless of what happens with Obamacare next year.
You know,
Wow.
Tom, just
Okay.
a quick interesting point about that. They recently asked Mark Pryor in politically very tough, very hostile territory for Democrats that was running for re-election, running for his third term. They asked him about Obama. He said, "Well, we shouldn't be focused so much on who the president is now, but rather on who the president's going to be 3 years from now." So it's almost like he's already. That's kind of a strategy for conservative Democrats. Say, well, you know, he's a lame duck anyways. Let's just focus on the next president.
Yeah. What a sad.
Exactly.
Tom, send your resume to Cyrus.
Yeah. Cyrus, it's in the mail. Thanks for
Gentlemen,
tuning in.
Rich Rubino, Ed Romback, Tom Farmer, thank you for being on Politics is Sexy, and I want to thank all our viewers. Make sure you check us out on Facebook and keep following us. We love having you, love hearing from you, and gentlemen, Happy New Year. Have a great, safe, and happy and healthy week, and we'll see you next week on another edition
happy
of
Canadian
Politics is
Boxing Day.
Sexy.
That's
Yes.
right.
And
All right,
Sim
Thanks,
Sim
everyone.
Salabim.
Happy New Year.
Cheers. Happy New Year. Bye, everyone. Check us out on Facebook.